The gymnasium erupted into chaos in less than 3 seconds. One moment, the crowd of parents and children were watching the police K-9 demonstration with polite interest, phones recording the routine obedience exercises. And the next, Rex, the department's most decorated German shepherd, was airborne. His 75 pounds of muscle and training launched forward with such explosive force that his handler, Officer Mark Lawson, was yanked off balance before he even registered what was happening. The leather leash burned through Mark's palm as he scrambled to regain control, boots skidding on the polished gym floor. "Rex, down, down!" Mark's command came out sharp and desperate, but the dog wasn't listening. Rex had never not listened. Not like this. Not in front of 200 witnesses. The shepherd's bark tore through the space, deep and guttural, the kind of sound that meant business. Parents jerked backward, instinctively pulling their children close. A woman screamed. Folding chairs scraped and toppled as people scrambled away from the sudden violence. Mark could see the fear spreading through the crowd like ripples on water, see the way parents were looking at Rex and at him, like they'd brought a monster into an elementary school. "Everyone stay calm," Mark shouted, but his voice was lost in the commotion. He had both hands on the leash now, leaning back with his full weight, and still Rex strained forward. The dog's attention was locked on something in the far corner of the gymnasium, near the emergency exit. His ears were pinned flat, lips curled back from his teeth, and that low, continuous growl rumbled from somewhere deep in his chest. Mark followed the dog's line of sight, searching desperately for whatever had triggered this reaction. The corner was nearly empty, just a few scattered parents near the doorway, a janitor's cart pushed against the wall, and a cluster of kids waiting for the bathroom. Nothing threatening, nothing worth this kind of response. Principal Morrison was already moving toward them, her face tight with controlled panic. Behind her, Vice Principal Chen had his phone out, probably calling the station. Mark could see how this would play out, how it was already playing out. This was the end. The final incident. The one that would force the department's hand. Rex's whole body was coiled like a spring, every muscle trembling with restrained energy. His focus hadn't wavered for even a second. Whatever he sensed, whatever invisible threat his trained nose had detected, it consumed him completely. Mark had seen Rex track suspects through dark buildings, had watched him search collapsed structures after the tornado last year, had trusted this dog with his life more times than he could count. But he'd never seen him like this. This wasn't the controlled aggression of a trained police dog. This was something primal, something terrified. "Officer Lawson." Principal Morrison's voice cut through the noise, authority wrapped around barely concealed anger. "You need to remove that animal immediately." "I'm trying," Mark snapped back, then caught himself. "I'm sorry, he's not responding. Something's got his attention and I don't know what." The principal glanced toward the corner Rex was fixating on, then back at Mark. Her expression said everything. She saw nothing. Nobody saw anything. Just a police dog losing control in a room full of children. Mark's arms burned from the strain of holding Rex back. The dog's claws scraped frantically against the floor, searching for purchase. Parents were moving their kids toward the opposite exits now. A steady stream of people fleeing what should have been a routine community outreach event. Mark could hear them talking, voices rising with indignation and fear. Could hear the way they said the word dangerous and aggressive and shouldn't be here. They weren't wrong. But Rex had been coming to these demonstrations for 5 years. He'd posed for hundreds of photos with kids. He'd let toddlers pet his head and asked for nothing but the occasional treat. Something had changed, something Mark still couldn't identify or understand or fix. "Rex, heel!" Mark tried again, putting every ounce of command presence into his voice that academy training had taught him. For just a moment, the dog's ears flickered. Recognition. Then his attention snapped right back to that corner and the growling intensified. Officer Stevens appeared at Mark's shoulder. His own canine partner, a Belgian Malinois named Nitro, held on a tight lead several feet back. "What do you need?" Stevens asked quietly, his eyes scanning the crowd for threats Mark might have missed. "I don't know what he's reacting to," Mark admitted, the words tasting like failure. "There's nothing there." Stevens looked where Rex was staring, his expression unreadable. "You want me to check it out?" Before Mark could answer, Rex lunged again with renewed fury. The leash ripped through Mark's grip just enough that the dog gained 3 feet before Mark could haul him back. The movement sent a fresh wave of panic through the remaining crowd. More chairs toppled. A child started crying. Principal Morrison stepped back with her hands raised, and Mark saw the decision forming on her face. She was going to end this. Right here. Right now. "Mark!" Stevens said, his tone carrying a warning Mark didn't want to hear. Rex's bark echoed off the gymnasium walls, sharp and insistent. His front paws came off the ground as he fought against the restraint, fought to get to whatever invisible thing had triggered every protective instinct in his body. Mark could feel the animal's heart pounding, could see the whites of his eyes. This wasn't aggression, this was desperation. And that terrified Mark more than anything else, because Rex had never been wrong before. Not about threats, not about danger, not in 5 years of flawless service. If the dog was this certain, this absolutely convinced, that something in that corner needed his attention, what weren't they seeing? Mark's eyes swept the area again, slower this time, cataloging every detail. The janitor's cart with its mop and bucket, the red exit sign glowing above the door, 3 adults talking near the wall, glancing nervously at the commotion. A group of maybe 6 or 7 kids, elementary age, clustered together and whispering. One little girl in a pink jacket standing slightly apart from the others, her small hands clutching the straps of her backpack. Nothing. Just people. Just kids waiting their turn to use the restroom after too much excitement and too many juice boxes. Rex barked again, the sound raw and almost pleading. His whole body shook with the effort of trying to break free, to reach whatever target his nose had identified. Mark's grip was slipping. His shoulders screamed. The crowd was thinning rapidly now, parents herding children toward any exit that wasn't near the aggressive police dog. "Officer Lawson," Principal Morrison said again, and this time her voice carried the weight of an ultimatum. "If you cannot control that dog in the next 10 seconds, I'm clearing the building and calling this off. Permanently." Mark's mind raced through options that didn't exist. He couldn't let Rex go. He couldn't drag the dog out without understanding what had triggered him. He couldn't keep holding on much longer. And Rex. Rex kept staring at that empty corner like their lives depended on it. Mark made the decision in the space between one heartbeat and the next. He turned to Stevens and said, "Check the corner. Now." Stevens didn't hesitate. He moved quickly but carefully, keeping Nitro on a short lead as he approached the cluster of people Rex had been fixating on. The little girl in the pink jacket looked up as he got closer, her eyes going wide. She took a small step backward, pressing herself against the wall. Mark watched every movement, his hands still locked on Rex's leash even as the dog's pulling had decreased slightly. Rex was tracking Stevens now, watching his approach with intense focus but without the same desperate energy. Like he knew someone was finally listening, finally taking action. Stevens spoke to the adults first, his voice too low for Mark to hear over the remaining noise in the gymnasium. One of the men gestured toward the exit, clearly irritated by the interruption. The second man just shook his head and turned away. The woman pointed at Rex and said something that made Stevens' jaw tighten. Then Stevens crouched down to the children's level. He was good with kids, had 3 of his own. Mark saw him smile, saw the gentle way he addressed the group. Most of the children relaxed. 2 of them even smiled back. But the girl in the pink jacket, she didn't move. Her knuckles were white, where they gripped her backpack straps. Rex whined, a high, anxious sound that cut straight through Mark's chest. The dog shifted his weight from paw to paw, still focused on that corner, still convinced that something there needed attention. Mark's arms trembled from the sustained effort of holding him back, but he didn't dare loosen his grip. Not yet. Not until Stevens cleared the area or found whatever Rex had detected. "This is unacceptable," Principal Morrison said beside him, but her voice had lost some of its edge. She was watching Stevens too now, watching the way the veteran officer was carefully questioning the children. "What is he looking for?" "I don't know," Mark admitted, "but Rex thinks it's there. And in 5 years, he's never—" Mark's voice trailed off. That wasn't entirely true anymore, was it? Not these last few months. The behavioral changes had started small. So small, Mark had almost missed them. Rex had always been focused during their shifts, but about 3 months ago, that focus had shifted into something harder, more intense. The dog had started alerting on things Mark couldn't verify. Cars that turned out to be clean, buildings that held nothing suspicious, people who checked out perfectly normal when Mark ran their information. At first, Mark had assumed he was missing something, that Rex was picking up on residual scents or trace evidence Mark's human senses couldn't detect. Canines did that. It was what made them valuable. But then, the incidents had escalated. Rex had lunged at a man outside the grocery store, barking and snarling until Mark had hauled him back. The man had been terrified and completely innocent. 2 weeks after that, Rex had refused to release during a training exercise, holding onto the bite sleeve long past the command to let go. The trainer had been furious, concerned, had filed a report that went straight to the chief's desk. Mark had tried everything, changed Rex's diet, adjusted their training schedule, spent hours reviewing techniques and commands. The department vet had run a full panel. Blood work, x-rays, a complete physical. Everything came back normal. No pain, no illness, no physical explanation for the behavioral shift. The department psychiatrist, the one who usually dealt with officers, not K9S, had suggested that Rex might be responding to Mark's stress, that dogs, especially trained partners, could pick up on their handler's emotional state and mirror it. Mark had wanted to argue, but the truth was he had been stressed. Taking over Rex after his original handler retired had been an honor and a nightmare. Officer Chen had worked with Rex since the dog was 18 months old. They'd had a bond Mark couldn't replicate no matter how many hours he logged with the shepherd. And Rex had known, had felt the difference, had maybe even resented it. But this wasn't stress response. This was something else entirely. Stevens was standing now, having finished with the children. He gestured for the adults to move the kids toward the main exit, away from the commotion. Most of them complied immediately, clearly eager to leave. The little girl in the pink jacket stayed frozen for a moment longer, and Stevens had to gently touch her shoulder before she finally moved. She walked slowly, each step deliberate, her small hands still clutching that backpack like it was the only solid thing in a tilting world. Rex lunged again the moment she started moving, not as violently as before, but with clear purpose. His attention followed the girl as she walked, his body leaning hard against the leash, every muscle coiled and ready. Mark's stomach dropped. The dog wasn't reacting to the corner, he was reacting to her, to that little girl. "No," Mark breathed. "No, Rex, you can't." But the dog wasn't listening. His focus was absolute. As the girl passed within 15 feet of their position, Rex's whining intensified into sharp, urgent barks. The girl flinched with each sound, her small body jerking like she'd been struck. She walked faster, nearly running now, and Rex tried to follow. Mark staggered backward from the force of the pull, his boots losing purchase on the smooth floor. Stephen saw it too. Mark watched realization cross his fellow officer's face, watched him turn to follow the girl's path with new attention. Principal Morrison stepped forward, her hand raised as if to stop Stevens, but he was already moving. He intercepted the girl before she reached the exit, crouching down again and speaking quietly. The child shook her head. Stevens said something else, his expression gentle but firm. The girl's face crumpled. She looked back over her shoulder toward the now empty corner, toward the spot where she'd been standing before all of this started. Then she looked at Rex, and even from across the gymnasium, Mark could see the fear in her eyes. Not the startled fear of a child surprised by a barking dog. Something deeper, older. Stevens held out his hand, palm up. Not demanding, just offering. The girl's shoulders shook. Then, very slowly, she slipped the backpack off her shoulders and held it out to him. Rex stopped barking. Just like that, the sudden silence felt louder than all the noise that had come before. The dog sat, his body still tense but no longer fighting the leash. His tail remained still. His ears were forward, and he was staring at that backpack with the same intensity he'd shown during every successful narcotic detection, every weapons find, every piece of evidence he'd ever alerted on in his career. Mark's pulse hammered in his ears. He watched Stevens take the backpack carefully, watched him unzip it with slow, deliberate movements, watched the officer's face go absolutely still as he looked inside. Stevens's head came up. His eyes found Mark's across the distance of the gymnasium. Then he turned to Principal Morrison and said, very calmly, "We need to evacuate this building. Right now." The words landed like stones in still water. Principal Morrison's face went pale. What did you find?" "I need you to activate your emergency protocol," Stevens continued, his voice steady but carrying an edge that made Mark's blood run cold. "Evacuate everyone to the far parking lot. Keep them at least 300 feet from the building. Do not let anyone back inside for any reason." "Officer Stevens, I need to know." "Ma'am." Stevens stood, holding the pink backpack away from his body like it might bite him. "I need you to do this now, please. And someone needs to call the bomb squad." The evacuation happened faster than Mark would have thought possible. Principal Morrison's voice came over the PA system 30 seconds after Stevens's request, calm and professional, despite the tremor Mark could hear underneath. "Fire drill procedures. Everyone outside. Teachers at the front of their lines. No running, no panic." Except there was panic. The adults felt it, even if the children didn't understand yet. Mark saw it in the way parents gripped their kids, hands just a little too tightly, in the way teachers counted heads twice and then counted again, in the hurried whispers that rippled through the crowd as they filed toward the exits. Rex walked beside Mark now without pulling, his attention still fixed on that pink backpack Stevens carried like it contained something alive and dangerous. The dog's calm was almost worse than his earlier aggression, because it confirmed everything. Rex knew, had known all along. Mark's hands shook as he guided Rex through the side door and into the parking lot. The autumn air felt too bright, too normal, after the chaos of the gymnasium. Parents clustered in confused groups, demanding explanations no one was authorized to give yet. Children bounced on their toes, excited by the unexpected disruption to their day. And somewhere in that crowd of 200 people, Mark knew, were the adults who had been standing near that corner, the ones who had looked so annoyed when Stevens approached. Stevens had the girl now. She stood beside him near the flagpole, her small frame dwarfed by his uniform, her face streaked with tears. The backpack sat on the ground between them, and Stevens had positioned himself so his body blocked it from view. Smart. No need to start a stampede before they knew what they were dealing with. Mark approached slowly, Rex heeling perfectly at his side, and Stevens looked up with an expression Mark couldn't quite read. "Bomb squad's 10 minutes out," Stevens said quietly. "Fire department staging at the perimeter. Chief wants us to maintain the cordon and keep everyone calm until EOD clears the package." "What is it?" Mark asked. Though part of him didn't want to know. Didn't want to confirm what Rex's behavior had been screaming at him for the last 15 minutes. "Components." Stevens replied, his voice flat. "Professional. The tone officers used when they needed to describe things they wished they'd never seen. Separated and wrapped. Nothing assembled, nothing active, but everything needed. Timers. Batteries. Blasting caps. Enough material that if someone knew what they were doing." He trailed off, glancing down at the girl beside him. Mark felt the ground tilt underneath him. Rex had been right. Completely, terrifyingly right. And Mark had been pulling him back, fighting against the alert, treating the dog's most critical detection of his career like it was another false positive. The guilt hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. "She's 7 years old," Stevens continued, and now Mark could hear the anger bleeding through his professional mask. "Says her father packed the bag this morning, told her she had to bring it to school and leave it in the gymnasium during the assembly. Told her if she said anything to anyone, something bad would happen to her mother." The girl sobbed quietly, her small shoulders shaking. Rex took a step toward her, and Mark felt the leash tighten. But the dog's body language wasn't aggressive. His ears were forward but soft. His tail gave one slow wag. He moved closer to the child with careful deliberation, then sat beside her and leaned his weight gently against her leg. The girl's hand came down automatically, fingers curling into Rex's fur like she was anchoring herself to something solid. Mark's throat closed. He'd seen Rex comfort victims before. Children pulled from car accidents, elderly residents after home invasions, witnesses too traumatized to speak. The dog had always had that instinct, that ability to know when force wasn't needed and presence was everything. But this was different. This child had been carrying death in her backpack, had been used as a delivery system for something that could have killed dozens, and Rex was treating her like what she was, a victim, not a threat, never a threat. "Father's name is David Chen," Stevens said, pulling out his phone and scrolling through notes. "Works as a contractor, does maintenance for the school district, has access to most of the buildings. Mother's name is Linda. She's a teacher's aide at the middle school across town." He paused, his jaw tight. "Units are rolling to both locations now. Sounds like we might have stumbled into something bigger than a single incident." Mark's mind raced through the implications. A contractor with building access. A child used as a mule, because no one would question a 7-year-old carrying a backpack into a school assembly. The separated components that would draw less attention than a completed device. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated, professional, and if David Chen had done this once, Rex alerted on her 3 weeks ago. Mark said suddenly, the memory clicking into place. "Outside the grocery store. I wrote it off as a bad read. But she was there with her mother, and Rex went crazy. Just like today, I pulled him back and apologized and—" His voice cracked. He was trying to tell me. Stevens looked at him, and Mark saw understanding in his eyes. "You couldn't have known." "He knew," Mark said, gesturing to Rex. "He's been trying to tell me for months. Every alert I thought was wrong, every time I corrected him for reacting to nothing. What if he was right? What if I've been shutting down legitimate detections because I couldn't see what he was smelling?" The bomb squad arrived before Stevens could respond, their van pulling up with controlled urgency. The EOD technician was a woman Mark recognized from joint training exercises. Officer Patricia Wade, 20 years on the force and nerves of absolute steel. She listened to Stevens's briefing with her helmet tucked under one arm, nodded once, then suited up without any visible concern. Mark watched her approach the pink backpack like she was going for a walk in the park, saw her kneel beside it with practiced efficiency, saw her carefully examine the contents without touching anything. 5 minutes later, she gave the all-clear for the building but ordered the backpack transported in the containment unit. "Nothing active," she called back to Stevens. "But your dog's nose is solid. This is bad news wrapped in cartoon characters." She glanced at Rex, who was still sitting beside the little girl, and gave him a small salute. "Good boy." The girl started crying harder. Mark heard her say something to Stevens, her voice too quiet to make out, and Stevens crouched down to her level again. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said firmly. "Your dad. He's the one who made the bad choice, not you. You understand? You're safe now. Your mom's safe. And this dog," he gestured to Rex, who tilted his head attentively. "This dog probably saved a lot of people today, including you." The radio traffic exploded then. Multiple units calling in from different locations. Mark caught fragments. Suspect in custody at the middle school. Second device found in maintenance vehicle. 3 additional individuals detained at contractor's office. Chief Dawson's voice cut through the chatter, ordering all units to coordinate with federal agents en route. Federal. That meant this wasn't just a local case. This was something that had roots deeper than one angry man with building access. Mark looked down at Rex, who looked back at him with those dark, intelligent eyes. The dog's tail wagged once. Twice. Like he was saying, "Finally. Finally, you listened." "I'm sorry," Mark whispered, kneeling beside his partner. His hands shook as he ran them through Rex's fur, feeling the solid warmth of the animal who had been trying to protect people even when his own handler couldn't hear him. "I'm so sorry, buddy. You were right. You were right the whole time." Rex licked his hand, then turned his attention back to the girl, who was still holding onto his fur like a lifeline. And Mark understood. This was who Rex had always been. Not aggressive. Not unreliable. Just absolutely committed to finding threats no one else could see and protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, even when it meant fighting against the handler who should have trusted him. The federal agents arrived 90 minutes after the first device was secured, their unmarked vehicles pulling into the school parking lot, with the kind of quiet efficiency that spoke of countless similar scenes. Agent Sarah Vega introduced herself to Mark with a firm handshake and eyes that cataloged everything in 3 seconds flat. She listened to his account without interrupting, took notes in a leather-bound notebook that looked older than Mark's career, and then asked to see Rex. The shepherd sat at attention while Vega circled him slowly, studying his posture and movement with the focus of someone who understood working dogs on a fundamental level. 5 years in service, she said, not quite a question. Narcotics and explosives certified. Apprehension trained. How many confirmed fines? 47. Mark answered, the number automatic after months of defending Rex's record to departmental review boards. Before today. 48 now, I guess. 48, Vega repeated, crouching down to Rex's level. The dog's ears perked forward with interest, but he held his position. And how many of those fines involve children as carriers? Mark's stomach clenched. This is the first. No, Vega said quietly, her gaze still locked on Rex. This is the first one you recognized. Your incident reports over the last 3 months. I pulled them on the drive over. Rex alerted 6 times on individuals who were later cleared. No contraband found, no warrants. Nothing to justify the dog's behavior. She stood, brushing dust from her knees. 5 of those 6 individuals had children with them. 4 of those children were carrying backpacks or bags. The words landed like punches. Mark felt Steven shift beside him, heard his sharp intake of breath. The parking lot seemed to tilt slightly, the afternoon sun suddenly too bright. "We searched the bags," Mark said, but his voice sounded hollow even to his own ears. "There was nothing. Nothing you were trained to recognize," Vega interrupted, not unkindly. "Because you were looking for completed devices or bulk quantities of material. But these networks, they're smart. They move components in small batches, separated pieces that mean nothing individually. A battery here, wire there, timing mechanism in another location. All of it passing through carriers who don't even know what they're transporting." She paused, letting that sink in. Or, in this case, carriers who are too young and too scared to say no. Steven swore under his breath. Mark couldn't speak at all. He was replaying every incident in his mind now, seeing them through this new lens. The woman outside the grocery store with her daughter, the man at the bus stop with his grandson, the teenager he'd stopped for a traffic violation who'd had his little sister in the back seat. Every time, Rex had alerted. Every time, Mark had found nothing. Every time, he'd pulled the dog back and logged it as handler error or behavioral inconsistency. Every time, Rex had been right. "The network we've been tracking operates across 4 counties," Vega continued, her voice taking on the cadence of a briefing. "Local contractors, school employees, volunteer coordinators, people with access and cover stories that hold up under casual scrutiny. They've been moving material for 8 months that we know of, probably longer. Small quantities. Frequent transfers. Using family members, especially children, as mules because nobody questions a kid with a backpack in a school zone." Her expression hardened. "Your dog started alerting on their scent markers 3 months ago. Which means he's been detecting their chemical signature on the children who were being used as carriers." Mark's legs felt unsteady. He reached down instinctively, his hand finding Rex's head, needing the physical confirmation that the dog was still there. Still solid, still the same partner he'd been failing to trust for months. "Chemical signature?" he managed. "You mean residue." "I mean fear," Vega said flatly. "Stress hormones. The specific cocktail of cortisol and adrenaline that saturates someone who's been coerced into carrying something they know is dangerous. Adult carriers mask it better. They understand the stakes, they control their responses. But children—" She glanced toward where the little girl in the pink jacket was still being interviewed by a social worker near the fire truck. "Children can't hide that kind of terror. It soaks into their clothes, their skin, their belongings. And your dog—" She looked back at Rex with something approaching respect. "Your dog learned to recognize it, taught himself a new detection profile without any formal training because his primary directive is threat assessment, and he understood, on some instinctive level, that these children were connected to danger." The silence that followed felt heavy with implications Mark was only beginning to understand. Beside him, Stevens had gone very still, his attention fixed on Rex like he was seeing the shepherd for the first time. Mark's hand trembled where it rested on Rex's head, and the dog leaned into the touch with a soft sigh. "The department wanted to retire him," Mark said, the confession scraping out of him. "I had orders to complete one final evaluation today, and if he showed any signs of aggression—" He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't say out loud how close they'd come to ending Rex's career, and how many people might have died if that had happened. Vega nodded like she'd expected as much. Standard procedure when a working dog shows behavioral changes without clear medical cause. No one blames you for following protocol, Officer Lawson. But protocol doesn't account for dogs who evolve beyond their initial training parameters. Rex saw a pattern you couldn't see, developed a detection capability your department didn't know to test for, and tried to communicate that threat in the only way he knew how. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through something Mark couldn't see from his angle. "I'm recommending him for specialized certification. Victim detection and coercion identification. It's a new field. We've only got maybe a dozen dogs nationwide who've shown the aptitude. If you're willing, and if your department approves, we'd like to work with both of you. Formal training, proper protocols, a handler who understands what his partner is actually telling him." The last part stung, but Mark couldn't argue with it. He looked down at Rex, meeting those dark, intelligent eyes that had been trying to save lives while Mark had been pulling him back and writing incident reports. "I should have trusted you," he said quietly, aware that Vega and Stevens could hear but not particularly caring. "You've never let me down. Not once. I let you down." Rex's tail wagged, slow and forgiving. The dog's expression held no resentment, no judgment, just the steady, unwavering loyalty that had defined their partnership even when Mark hadn't deserved it. The shepherd stood, stretched, and pressed his shoulder against Mark's leg with casual affection, like he was saying, "We're good. We're still a team. Just listen next time." Chief Dawson appeared 20 minutes later, his uniform crisp despite the long afternoon, and his face carrying the weight of someone who'd spent the last 2 hours coordinating with federal agencies and explaining to the mayor how a school assembly had turned into a multi-county trafficking investigation. He spoke with Vega first, their conversation too quiet for Mark to overhear, then approached with an expression Mark had learned to read over 6 years on the force. Not angry, not disappointed, something more complicated that lived in the space between pride and exhaustion. "Officer Lawson," the chief said, and Mark straightened automatically. "I've just spent 20 minutes listening to a federal agent explain how your dog single-handedly identified a domestic terrorism network that's been operating under our noses for the better part of a year." She used the word invaluable 4 times. She also mentioned that Rex's behavioral incidents over the last 3 months were actually successful detections that we failed to recognize. He paused, his jaw working. "I signed retirement orders for this dog yesterday, had them on my desk, ready to file Monday morning." Mark's throat closed. He didn't trust himself to speak. "Those orders are getting shredded," Dawson continued, "along with every incident report that questioned Rex's reliability. Agent Vega has requested your partnership for federal task force work, pending proper certification training. I told her I'd discuss it with you, but..." He looked down at Rex, then back at Mark. "I think we both know you've already made that decision." Mark's hand found Rex's head again, fingers curling into the familiar fur. The dog leaned into him, solid and steady. "Yes, sir," Mark managed. "If Rex is willing to keep working with me after I've been such a terrible partner, then yes, absolutely yes." "You weren't terrible," Dawson said, and his voice carried unexpected gentleness. "You were human. You followed your training and trusted your eyes instead of your dog's nose. Most handlers would have done the same. The difference is you're being given the chance to learn from it." He crouched down, bringing himself to Rex's level, and held out his hand. The shepherd sniffed it politely, then offered his paw for a shake. Dawson smiled, the expression transforming his usually stern face. "Good boy," he said quietly. "Thank you for not giving up on us." The little girl was released to her mother just before sunset. Linda Chen arrived with 2 social workers and a victim's advocate, her face ravaged by tears and shock, and the kind of guilt Mark recognized from every family member who'd ever asked how they could have missed the signs. She held her daughter for a long time in the parking lot, while the social workers explained next steps and protection protocols, while federal agents outlined the case against her husband and the network he'd been part of, while the world kept turning, despite the fact that hers had just shattered. Before they left, the girl broke away from her mother and ran back toward where Mark stood with Rex. The shepherd's tail started wagging before she even reached them, and when she dropped to her knees in front of him, he lowered his head so she could wrap her small arms around his neck. "Thank you," she whispered into Rex's fur, her voice so quiet Mark almost missed it. Thank you for keeping me safe. Thank you for not letting me." She didn't finish, but she didn't need to. Rex understood. Mark could see it in the way the dog went absolutely still, letting the child hold him, offering the kind of steady comfort that only an animal who'd spent his career protecting people could provide. When she finally pulled back, her face was wet but calmer. She looked up at Mark with eyes that seemed far too old for 7. "Is he going to be okay?" she asked. "I heard people saying he was in trouble because of me." "He's not in trouble," Mark said firmly, kneeling down beside her. "He was never in trouble. He was doing exactly what he was trained to do, keeping people safe, including you, and he's going to keep doing that for a long time." He paused, making sure she was really hearing him. "None of this was your fault. You understand? What your dad did, what he made you do. That was his choice, not yours. You were brave. You helped stop something really bad from happening." "And Rex?" Mark glanced at his partner, feeling emotion clog his throat. "Rex made sure everyone knew you needed help." The girl reached out and touched Rex's head one more time, her small hand gentle against his dark fur. Then she stood, took her mother's hand, and walked toward the waiting car. Mark watched them go, watched the advocates and social workers form a protective circle around them, watched them drive away toward whatever came next, for a family torn apart by choices one member had made. Rex leaned against Mark's leg, and Mark looked down at his partner. Really looked at him. Saw the dog who'd fought against every signal to stand down because protecting people mattered more than obedience. Saw the partner who'd learned to detect threats Mark couldn't imagine, and had tried desperately to communicate them despite having no handler who understood. Saw the shepherd who'd been labeled aggressive and unreliable for doing exactly what he'd been trained to do, just on a level nobody had thought to prepare for. "I'm going to do better," Mark promised quietly, aware he was making the vow as much to himself as to Rex. "I'm going to learn your language, going to trust your nose, even when I can't see what you're smelling. Going to be the partner you deserve, instead of the one who keeps pulling you back from doing your job." He ran his hand along Rex's shoulders, feeling the strong muscles and steady warmth. "Deal!" Rex's tail wagged. His mouth opened in what looked remarkably like a smile. And when they walked back toward the patrol car together, the dog's stride matched Mark's perfectly. Two partners moving forward together, finally on the same page, finally ready to do the work they'd both been called to do. The specialized training would start in 3 weeks, Vega had told him. Formal certification in victim detection and coercion identification. New protocols. New techniques. A chance to be part of something that might help identify trafficking networks before they could hurt anyone else. But that was 3 weeks away. For now, as the sun set behind the elementary school and federal agents finished processing the scene and Principal Morrison supervised the building lockdown, Mark opened the patrol car door and let Rex jump into his usual spot in the back. The dog circled once, twice, then settled with his head on his paws and his eyes on Mark's reflection in the rearview mirror. "You're a good boy," Mark said, and this time he meant it with his whole heart. "The best boy. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure that out." Rex's tail thumped against the seat. Just once. Just enough. And as Mark pulled out of the parking lot and headed back toward the station, he understood that this was what partnership actually meant. Not just following commands or executing training, but trusting each other enough to listen, even when the message didn't make sense, believing in capabilities neither of them had known existed, and never, ever giving up, even when the whole world was pulling in the opposite direction. Rex had taught him that. Had shown him what loyalty really looked like, had demonstrated courage Mark was still learning to match. The road stretched ahead of them, familiar and solid. And together they drove toward whatever came next.